Good morning, everyone. Gray morning, sun's trying to pop through, and it will eventually before the next round of storms comes through. But today, right now, we're going to take a look at Psalm 105. It's the alternate reading psalm. It's one of five different psalms that recounts a lot of the history of the people of Israel. There's Psalm 98, 105, which is what I'm going to read just a portion of, 106, 135, and 136. Those psalms are a little bit lengthy. This one is one of the longer ones. That's why we're not going to read the whole thing. But it recounts the history of the people of Israel through all these difficult times up to the time that the Psalms were written, in order that the people would come to appreciate what Yahweh had done for them. But there's some things we need to talk about with this psalm. But let's see how it begins. Oh, give thanks to the Lord. Call upon his name. Make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him. Sing praises to him. Tell of all his wonderful works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Now, what's interesting is, and what I like to talk about is, with these psalms in particular, they were written as the people would be making their journey to Jerusalem to go to the temple to worship. All right? And you know how forgetful we get? We just don't remember, or we often use the phrase, how soon they forget. Or, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. Well, that's why the people would sing these psalms, because it was an opportunity to remember your history. But there's also something interesting going on, especially with Psalm 105. When you read the first 15 verses, you know what's happening? You're actually reading something that David wrote that's recorded in the book of Chronicles. In other words, the author of Psalm 105 plagiarized. Yes, he plagiarized. And it's kind of a strange thing. What David was talking about was moving the ark by the Levites, the priests. They would move the ark from one place to another because it didn't have a home yet. The temple was still being built. And this was a psalm that they would recite moving from one place to the other. All right? So it's kind of interesting. And it kind of goes unnoticed quite often. We just start doing our thing with this psalm and singing away. Well, really, it's plagiarism. But it's good, because this means that by the time the psalm was written down, the book of Chronicles was well imbued in the people's vocabulary, so to speak, in their minds, in their worship. And the writer wanted that to be an important part to begin the psalm, because now the psalm moves on to tell of some of the other wondrous works of God. Most importantly, it talks about Joseph and then Moses. And what Moses did to lead the people out of slavery in Egypt. But this is where it really gets interesting, because what you read in Psalm 105 is different than from what you read in Exodus chapter 10 and those chapters around that, maybe 8 on through 10, because the story that's recorded in Exodus is the one that we generally repeat in our narratives to our kids on the 10 Commandments, things like that. But we look in the Psalms, and it's the order of the plagues is a little bit different. Just as an instance, in this psalm, darkness is the very first plague that comes upon the people of Egypt. Darkness. And Exodus tells us it lasted for 3 days. 3 days. Where in Exodus does darkness pop up? Oh, it shows up as the next to the last plague. what's that all about? Somebody didn't get things right. Somebody wasn't reading their Bibles correctly. And then if you go to Psalm 98, which has a recount of the plagues, you'll see that, oh, wait a minute. They didn't even mention the darkness in Psalm 78. What's that all about? And in one of the other Psalms, I'm not sure, I think it's in one of the 135 or 136, they mention frost as part of the plague of the hail. In Exodus, all we have is the hail. There's no mention of frost. See, are you starting to scratch your head a little bit? How can things get so messed up? And then, to top it all off, we're talking about the importance of Moses for the people of Israel. Guess what is not mentioned in any of these 5 Psalms? Moses on Mount Sinai getting the 10 Commandments. Now it really gets confusing. Isn't that one of the most important things for the people of Israel? The law, the Torah, being laid down before them from Moses? Of course it is. But this is what we need to know. And this is where sometimes we really get it messed up. We think that this Bible just magically floated down out of heaven one day and people picked it up and they were able to say, hey, this is the Word of God. God said it. I believe it. That settles it. What we forget is that's not the way it happened. These are scriptures written over 2,000 years, maybe up to 2,500 years. A lot of it passed down orally. And as the people got separated, especially after their civil unrest, where there became now the 2 separate nations, Israel to the north, Judah to the south, and then there was the Babylonian captivity. Through all that, different traditions emerged, different strains of these stories, and some of them were just a little bit different than others. And that's what we pick up in the Psalms. As the Psalms were put together, they were written over quite a few different years so that they could be used for temple worship. But they emerged from some of these different strains of storytelling that came together. And that's why some of the stories are just slightly different. It doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, somebody's right, somebody's wrong. Oh, we're in trouble. What do we do now? The Bible isn't accurate. Oh, no. Just realize that as the stories were passed along generation to generation, that they came from different portions of the people of God, whether in Israel, Judah, captivity, and now they've landed here, and we can be thankful that those early scribes and rabbis and that thought enough to keep every single story. Because if they felt that one story was wrong and the other one was right, they would have erased one of them, correct? I mean, that's what we would tend to do. Oh, we got to come up with every detail that matches. They don't have to match, because what you need to do is read the story and say, and try to, internalize, what does that story mean for me? How do I place myself into that story? And that's what these Psalms would do. They wanted the people marching into Israel to feel themselves as part of that story. Okay? All right? So, don't be alarmed when you see things that don't end up quite the same and they're a little bit different. And let me tell you, this is just one example. There are countless examples of this, especially happening in the Older Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, because they did come from so many varying traditions. But let it be something to enrich your faith. Okay, this is how the Israelites heard it. This is how the Judeans heard it. You know what? It all comes together to tell us one thing. We have a wondrous God, a God full of love, loving kindness. Remember that word, hesed? Grace to to flood our lives so that we can see our way through any difficult moment. And these moments that are recounted in these Psalms were difficult moments. All the traumatic moments that the people had gone through and how God had pulled them through in the midst of their troubles. We have a God who does that. A God who doesn't desert us. A God who keeps His promises even when we fail so often to keep ours. Psalm 105. It won't be the whole thing that's read in church for those following the alternate readings, just portions of it, especially the Moses story, since it's linked up with Moses and the burning bush. But it's a goodie. Take time to read. It's long, too long to read the whole thing right now. Psalm 105. God's blessings be with you, especially as this psalm says, they are with us all the way through our lives. Have an awesome day.